KPFA, KPFB Berkeley 88.1, KFCF in Fresno.
Good evening. It's Friday, September 25th. The body of the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in state at the U.S. Capitol today. The first woman in American history so honored. President Trump will name federal judge Amy Coney Barrett as his nominee to replace the women's rights pioneer tomorrow at the White House. President Trump trying to chip away at his Democratic rival's advantage with black and Hispanic voters during a two-day campaign swing to Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. A federal judge rules that the Trump administration's leading steward of public lands has been serving unlawfully and blocks him from continuing in the position. The U.S. Bureau of Land Management Acting Director William Perry Penley served unlawfully for more than a year and was never confirmed to the post by the U.S. Senate. Breonna Taylor's family demands today that Kentucky authorities release all body camera footage, police files, and the transcripts of the grand jury hearings that led to no charges against the police officers who killed the black woman during a drug raid at her apartment in the middle of the night. Family lawyer Benjamin Crump wants to see if State Attorney General Daniel Cameron gave the grand jury any evidence to warrant charging the cops.
We don't know what evidence he presented to that grand jury. Did he present any evidence whatsoever on behalf of Breonna Taylor?
California will close a prison holding about 1,500 male inmates next year. Governor Gavin Newsom announces the 67-year-old Duell Vocational Institution in Tracy will be shut down. Confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the U.S. hit another milestone, 7 million. In the Midwest, the virus is now landing squarely in places where there is strong resistance to masks, and governors have been reluctant to require face coverings. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg lay in state today at the U.S. Capitol, the first woman so honored, making history again as she had throughout her extraordinary life. The flag-draped casket of Ginsburg, who died last week at 87, in the Capitol's Grand Statuary Hall drew members of Congress, military officials, friends, and family, some with children in tow, paying respect to the liberal icon who changed American law and perceptions of women's power. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and his wife Jill sat quietly with other invited guests. His vice presidential running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, also attended. Harris said RBG, as the late justice is known by many, absolutely and intentionally cleared a path for women like herself in civic life. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said it was with profound sorrow that she welcomed the liberal icon and opened the private service. She and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer welcomed Ginsburg's casket. Her casket made the short procession from the court's steps, where it had been on public view for several days, to the east front of the Capitol. Reporter Rebecca Foster.
Ginsburg's casket was carried up the steps of the Capitol by members of the U.S. military draped in an American flag. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, lawmakers decided to make the memorial ceremony inside Congress invite only. Thousands of members of the public paid their respects earlier this week when Ginsburg's casket was brought to the Supreme Court. Rebecca Foster reporting.
Today's ceremony focused on her life and work with musical selections from one of her favorite opera singers, mezzo-soprano Denise Graves. She is the first Jewish American to lie in state at the Capitol. Small in stature, large in history, the Brooklyn-born Ginsburg was remembered as a bright Columbia graduate who was passed over for jobs at a time when few women entered the law, only to go on to reshape the nation's laws protecting women's rights and equality. Step by step, said Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt of the Adass Israel Congregation in Washington, Ginsburg changed the course of American law.
Pursuing justice took resilience, persistence, a commitment to never stop. As a lawyer, she won equality for women and men, not in one swift victory, but brick by brick, case by case, through meticulous, careful lawyering. She changed the course of American law. And even when her views did not prevail, she still fought. Zichrona livracha. God, give us the strength and bless us with the courage, the intelligence, the bravery, and the unbreakable resolve to pursue justice. Amen.
Holtzblatt said that Ginsburg pursued justice even as she fought personal discrimination as a woman and as a Jew and suffered throughout 5 bouts of cancer.
This was how Justice Ginsburg lived her life. Justice did not arrive like a lightning bolt, but rather through dogged persistence. All the days of her life. Real change, she said, enduring change, happens one step at a time.
The honor of lying in state has been accorded fewer than 36 times, mostly to presidents, vice presidents, and members of Congress. The Representative John Lewis, the civil rights icon, was the most recent person to lie in state following his death in July. Rosa Parks, a private citizen, not a government official, is the only woman who has lain in honor, which is a separate commemoration at the Capitol. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the second woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court, will be buried next week in Arlington National Cemetery beside her husband Martin, who died in 2010. Republicans, meanwhile, are expecting President Trump to announce tomorrow, Saturday at 5, that he's nominating Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court to replace Ginsburg. Even before Trump unveils the pick, conservative groups and congressional allies are laying the groundwork for a swift confirmation process for Barrett. They're organizing multi-million-dollar ad campaigns and marshaling supporters both to confirm the pick and to boost Trump to a second term. A federal appeals court is weighing the fate of a sweeping Missouri abortion law, including a provision that prohibits a woman from having an abortion because the fetus has Down syndrome. A 3-judge panel of the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis heard the arguments yesterday in the legal battle over the 2019 measure that bans abortions at or after 8 weeks of pregnancy. A ruling is not expected for several weeks. With the November election less than 40 days away, both presidential campaigns are trying to appeal to voters of color. Today, President Trump held a Latinos for Trump roundtable at his golf club in Doral, Florida, while Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris answered questions about race and the election at the NAACP's National Convention. KPFA's Kate Eder reports.
President Donald Trump tried to chip away at Joe Biden's support among voters of color in Florida, who could determine the outcome of the election in the crucial battleground state. At his quote-unquote Latinos for Trump event hosted at his golf course in Doral, Florida, Trump tried to turn voters against Biden.
Joe Biden betrayed Hispanic Americans, and I'm fighting for you, and we're fighting like never before. We can't let this anything happen. I think this will go down, and I think right now people are saying it's the most important election in the history of our country because they are stone cold crazy what they'll do to our country. You see it on the streets. You see it with the riots all the time.
In his speech, Trump appealed specifically to Cuban Americans, who are a crucial voting bloc in Florida. The Pew Research Center reports that a majority of Cuban Americans supported the Republican Party in 2018. Trump criticized Barack Obama's strategy of restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba and connected it to Joe Biden, saying that their policy, quote, enriched the Castro regime, end quote. Trump also appealed directly to Venezuelan Americans, specifically those who fled the country due to the economic fallout ushered in under Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Trump tried to stoke fear by comparing the U.S. to Venezuela.
We could be a Venezuela, too. You know, Venezuela 15 years ago was a very wealthy country, and then all of a sudden they went with a different ideology, and that country is a total disaster. It could happen. It could happen, because if you look at some of these people that you see with the storefronts and breaking down and the riots and everything that's going on, it's the same ideology. And so, it could happen here. This would be a Venezuela on a major steroids, okay? But we're not going to let it happen. It doesn't happen. With me, it doesn't happen. But you put the wrong people in office. It could happen rapidly.
According to the Pew Research Center, voters of Latin American descent will be a larger share of the electorate this November than in previous elections, especially in the swing states of Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Following his visit in Florida, Trump went next to Atlanta, where he hosted an event on Black economic empowerment. Trump unveiled his so-called Platinum Plan, which included a long list of promises with few details on how they would be fulfilled. Trump promised to increase capital in Black communities, expand opportunity zones, and also said he would designate the Ku Klux Klan, as well as Antifa, terrorist organizations, among other measures. He also promised to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Democratic vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris responded with her and Joe Biden's own plans to support Black Americans economically while speaking at the NAACP's national convention.
We've got to reimagine public safety and how we achieve it. Healthy communities are safe communities. So it is an outdated way of thinking to think the way you create safe communities is only by putting more police officers on the streets. You want to see safe communities? Invest in the health and well-being of those communities. Part of what our plan is about $150 billion going into low-interest loans and access to capital, with an emphasis on Black-owned and minority-owned businesses.
Harris also committed to securing a $15,000 tax credit to help families buy their first homes and tripling Title I funding, which sends resources to schools in low-income areas. Harris also cited her and Biden's push to increase access to health care, highlighting Biden's plan to create a public option as part of the Affordable Care Act, and their plan to help Americans receive affordable mental health care. During a discussion of criminal justice reforms, Harris expressed outrage over the decision of a Kentucky grand jury not to charge any police officers over the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor. Taylor, a young Black woman, was killed by police in the middle of the night while asleep in her own apartment.
It was a gut punch in many ways. Breonna Taylor was a caregiver in her spirit and her nature. She cared for her grandmother. She cared for her family. She cared for her community. She cared for society. She cared for people she had never met. She was beautiful inside and out in every way. And it is tragic. Her life deserves to be valued and to be honored. And she and her family and the rest of the community deserve justice.
Harris highlighted her and Joe Biden's plans for criminal justice reform, which include banning chokeholds as well as eliminating private prisons, cash bail, and the death penalty. Reporting for KPFA Pacifica Radio, I'm Kate Ida.
And you are listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFC at Fresno, online at kpfa.org. This week, leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus announced a comprehensive legislative package aimed at closing, or at least narrowing, the racial divide in the United States. Noah Litwer reports.
The Jobs and Justice of 2020 Act is a package of legislation, including over 200 bills addressing economic and social disparities currently plaguing black families across the nation. Representative Karen Bass of California, the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, co-wrote several of the bills relating to judicial reform. She says the act has a two-pronged approach to achieving racial justice through economic and judicial equity.
The Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 is a comprehensive legislative package of over 200 bills championed by members of the Congressional Black Caucus, composed of two key divisions. Division A, Jobs, includes several provisions to advance economic opportunity in underserved communities, including infrastructure investment, workforce development, poverty alleviation measures, small business support. Division 2, Justice. This division includes bold reform for our nation's criminal justice system from end to end.
Expanding on the importance of economic developments in the black community, Representative Dwight Evans of Pennsylvania described the connections between the health of black communities and black entrepreneurism.
When you talk about small businesses, they're like the backbone of any community across this country. And small businesses, particularly minority businesses, are very essential. We understand when we talk about jobs, you talk about entrepreneurship. The other aspect that is very important is having incentive, using market and tax credits, ways, and direct loans. Particularly with this pandemic, black businesses have tremendously been affected, and we need to make a difference of that. Also creating local incubators. We think that local incubators will be essential in this mark. So in the attempt of bringing all of that together under this particular initiative, we think we can make a huge difference.
According to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, black Americans have died from the novel coronavirus at more than twice the rate of their white counterparts. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York says that the same numbers apply to small business closures. But Representative Barbara Lee says this legislation is about more than just surviving through the crisis.
From raising the minimum wage to investing in equitable transportation infrastructure, these policies seek to combat years of systemically racist policies that have disproportionately impacted black and brown people. The role of the CBC at this historical moment is to really identify, fight for, and bring about the most significant legislative reform and maximize resources to help the black community not just survive the pandemic, but to prepare to thrive in its aftermath.
Noah Litwer reporting from Oakland, California.
A federal judge ruled today that the Trump administration's leading steward of public lands has been serving illegally and has blocked him from continuing in the position. U.S. District Judge Brian Moore said U.S. Bureau of Land Management Acting Director William Perry Pendley served unlawfully for 424 days without being confirmed to the post by the U.S. Senate. Montana's Democratic governor had sued to remove Pendley, saying the former oil industry attorney was illegally overseeing an agency that manages almost 250 million acres of land, primarily in the U.S. West. Pendley's position as acting director was one of several major leadership roles that the Trump administration has sought to fill through temporary appointments without going through the normal confirmation process. Trump said he was nominating Pendley in June, but the nomination was withdrawn earlier this month after the confirmation process threatened to become contentious, potentially disrupting key U.S. Senate races in Colorado and Montana, where Bullock, the Democratic governor, is seeking to unseat incumbent Republican Senator Steve Daines. But Pendley continued to hang on to his post under an arrangement that Pendley himself set up months ago. In a May 22nd order, Pendley made his own position, deputy director, the Bureau's top position when the director's office is vacant. After establishing that succession order, Pendley's actions included approval of 2 sweeping land resource management plans in Montana that would open 95% of federal land in the state to oil and gas developments. Pendley was a longtime industry attorney and property rights advocate from Wyoming who had called for the government to sell its public lands before joining the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the future of Montana's vote-by-mail option for the November election could be decided any day now, after a legal challenge wrapped up this week in federal court. Diane Bernard has that story.
President Donald Trump and other Republican groups sued the state over Governor Steve Bullock's decision to let counties use mail-in ballots to help keep voters safe during the pandemic. The GOP claims mail-in voting is subject to fraud, but Nancy Leifer with the Montana League of Women Voters refutes that idea and says lawsuits like this cause confusion and could influence some folks not to vote.
This kind of thing throws suspicion into people's minds about, well, oh gosh, is it really safe or isn't it? And of course, the thing about Montana is Montana has a very, very safe voting system, and there's absolutely no reason to be questioning it.
45 of the state's 56 counties have opted to offer a mail-in ballot. U.S. District Judge Dana Christensen promises to make a speedy decision in the case before the October 9th deadline to send out all the mail-in ballots. Leifer points out that it's important to follow this case because if the GOP challenge is successful, then no one will receive a mail-in ballot, which many are expecting. She says it would also force people to vote in person, and a final decision might not come in time to request an absentee ballot.
If you're for some reason unable to leave your house, and certainly there are people who are under quarantine from COVID who can't leave their house, that essentially disenfranchises them because they don't have time for the process to happen for them to get a ballot and get it back in again.
A 2017 state report found that allegations of mail-in voter fraud during a Montana special election that year were inflated and represented only a small portion of the votes cast. Support for this reporting is provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. For Public News Service, I'm Diane Bernard.
Attorneys for Breonna Taylor's family today called on Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron to release details about what the grand jury was told before it decided not to indict the police officers responsible for her fatal shooting in March. KPFA's Chris Lee has her story.
Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump says Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron must inform the public what evidence, if any, was presented on Breonna Taylor's behalf to the grand jury in their deliberation. Crump was joined by members of Taylor's family and supporters at Jefferson Square Park in Louisville, Kentucky.
If you did everything that you could do on Breonna's behalf, you shouldn't have any problem whatsoever, Daniel Cameron, to releasing the transcript so that we can see you fought for all of Kentucky's citizens, especially including Tamika Palmer's daughter, Breonna Taylor. Release the transcript. Release the transcript. Release the transcript. Release the transcript.
The call comes 2 days after Cameron announced a grand jury had decided not to indict any of the 3 police officers who slayed the 26-year-old EMT, concluding that additional charges were unlikely. Following that announcement, Cameron's predecessor, former Attorney General and current Governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, urged Cameron to release the evidence he provided to the jury and post it online. During a CNN interview, Beshear added he trusts the people of Kentucky with the truth and that such a disclosure would not be the first. Co-counsel for Taylor's family, who Crump calls his co-warrior, Lenita Baker, says if more details are released from the grand jury trial, it could reveal how many witnesses were called by Cameron to testify, the racial makeup of the jury, and if Cameron recommended the grand jury exonerate the officers of homicide charges. Baker says past prosecutors have disclosed these details without undermining grand jury confidentiality.
Quit dodging the questions, Daniel Cameron. You were asked at the press conference, did you make a recommendation? You refused to answer. Answer the question.
Answer the question.
And I've asked you several times, did you even present any charges regarding Breonna Taylor to the grand jury? I don't want to hear that the grand jury determined this if it's your office that unilaterally determined not to charge any officers with the death of Breonna Taylor.
Taylor's aunt, Bianca Austin, read a statement from Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, while wearing her niece's EMT jacket.
I was reassured Wednesday of why I have no faith in the legal system, in the police, in the law that are not made to protect us black and brown people. But when I speak on it, I'm considered an angry black woman. But know this, I am an angry black woman. I am not angry for the reasons that you would like me to be.
That's right.
I never had faith in Daniel Cameron to begin with.
Amen.
I knew he was too inexperienced to deal with a job of this caliber. I knew he had already chosen to be on the wrong side of the law. The moment he wanted the grand jury to make the decision.
Austin was joined by Taylor's sister, Janiyah Palmer, who did not speak but released a box filled with butterflies at the end of the proceedings. Other notable speakers were Tamika Mallory, civil rights activist and co-founder of Until Freedom, Kentucky State Representative Attica Scott, who in June introduced Breonna's Law, which banned no-knock warrants in the city of Louisville and spurred a similar ban in cities across the country, and Jacob Blake's father, Jacob Blake Sr., whose 29-year-old son was shot in the back several times by police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in front of his 3 young children. I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA Pacifica Evening News.
Fresno residents are calling for the resignation of an independent police reviewer who admitted to withholding his report on police abuse allegations involving a 17-year-old who was repeatedly punched in the face by a police officer. The Fresno Bee reports that police reviewer John Gliotta last week said in a public meeting he finished his report on accusations of brutality by police in the January 2019 arrest of 17-year-old London Wallace May. Gliotta said he did not publish his report because emotions remained too raw from the May 25th killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis. Oregon Governor Kate Brown is sending in state troopers and sheriff's deputies to Portland for the weekend to help local police in the state's largest city monitor competing Saturday protests. The right-wing group Proud Boys is holding a demonstration. Counter-protests by liberal groups are expected. Brown said today she's giving leadership of policing in the city over the weekend to the commanders of the state police and the local sheriff's office. Portland has had sometimes violent protests for more than 3 months following the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. They went into a lull during recent wildfires, but resumed this week. Police say one person was hurt when a vehicle ran into a small crowd of people protesting police brutality in Los Angeles last night. The driver of a pickup truck got into an argument with demonstrators and struck the protester who was standing in the street as the driver tried to get away. A few minutes later, the driver of a Prius also got involved in an argument with protesters. The Prius driver was detained. No arrests have been announced. As demonstrations for racial justice continue across the country, tomorrow, Maryland celebrates one of the nation's first civil rights activists, Frederick Douglass. Diane Bernard reports.
Frederick Douglass Day, held in his birthplace in eastern Maryland, highlights the prominent abolitionist activism and continued influence. Kedrick Roy with Harvard University will speak at the virtual event, which also features comments from Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. Roy says Douglass once told a black student that to become a great leader, you need to agitate over and over again.
Frederick Douglass's idea of a continual agitation, continual pushing to make the United States a better place for everyone is part of his legacy that we can still turn to today.
The online event begins at 10 a.m. and includes lectures, children's activities, and a dramatic reading. To participate, look online at the Frederick Douglass Honor Society's Facebook page. Roy says examining Douglass's life and work indicates he would approve of today's Black Lives Matter movement, which continues to point out racial injustices. He cites Douglass's speech on what the 4th of July meant to a slave as an example.
When Douglass asked, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? And he says, I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all the other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim.
Talbot County officials just unveiled a new outdoor exhibit that tells Douglass's story as a slave who escaped a Maryland plantation and went on to become a national leader. For Public News Service, I'm Diane Bernard.
Governor Gavin Newsom's administration said today that California next year will close a prison holding about 1,500 male inmates. It's the latest step to reduce the state's incarceration footprint, partly in response to the coronavirus and massive related budget cuts. State corrections officials said shuttering the 67-year-old Duell Vocational Institution in Tracy, in the Central Valley east of San Francisco, will save about $182 million a year. Newsom had called for closing a prison even before the pandemic devastated the state's budget, once calling it a core value of his administration. He expects to close a second prison in coming years, although some lawmakers want to advance that timetable. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast airing each night at 6 with a half-hour edition on the weekends. And it's archived online at kpfa.org. And it is an hour-long newscast. Sometimes it's difficult to listen to straight news for an hour without any kind of breaks, without any kind of, how would you say, stories of rest or distraction or frivolity, something that you can listen to kind of in the background as you make a ham sandwich or, get a glass of iced tea, something like that. It's a difficult newscast to listen to, I admit it. But if you can stay with us, it's packed full of stuff and it's got no nonsense in there. And there's nothing about pets, and unless it somehow impinges on politics, which is done a lot recently, actually. There's no sports stories normally. If you appreciate this kind of journalistic effort, if you appreciate the variety of issues that we address, the depth that we're able to go in, the different voices that you're able to hear, the longer periods of hearing from individuals instead of your standard 10, 15-second soundbite. That's important to you. I'm going to ask you to do something about it, which is nothing more dramatic than giving KPFA, this listener-sponsored radio station, some money to keep this kind of newscast, the KPFA Evening News, the Pacifica Evening News, on the air. We are winding up the first week of the Fall Fund Drive here at KPFA. We're trying to raise $450,000 to keep this radio station on the air. We are 90% listener-sponsored. There's no other alternative for us, except you, our listeners, because we don't do any advertising. We don't take any corporate underwriting. The federal government cut us off years ago. I don't know if it's the kind of anti-capitalist or anti-commercial vibe that you sometimes get listening to these airways, but generally speaking, there's no big corporations funding us, and there's no rich people either. That could just be a coincidence, matter of taste, but it could be that we stand for something called economic justice, try to live it, which is where you come in with your financial support, because with your financial support, we don't have to look to the rich and the powerful to fund us. We have a broad base of individual sponsors, and that's what you become when you make a donation to this radio station, a listener sponsor. So I'm asking you tonight to help keep us on the air, to show your support for this kind of journalism. The number to call is 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, or you can do it online at kpfa.org. And I am challenged tonight to get 30 independent, separate financial contributions to this radio station, 30 different people to call us at 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org and donate what you can. Average contribution is usually around something like $100. It's kind of steep. That's kind of big money, but, $25, $30, $40, $50, $60, or you can consider doing something monthly on the installment plan so that you can make a larger contribution without breaking your monthly budget. You can do that by tying your monthly contribution to your bank account or your credit card or your debit card. 1-800-439-5732. And finally this, everyone who calls 1-800-439-5732 and makes a donation or goes online at kpfa.org and makes a donation, we will provide you with the political history collection from KPFA. 15 different presentations, mostly lectures, including Richard Wolff on understanding socialism, Cornel West on the radical Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Greg Palast on how Trump stole 2020. That's right, 2020. Jason Stanley on how fascism works. David Clay Johnston on what Trump is doing to you. And Peter Linebaugh on Tom Paine and his lessons for our time. That's just a few of the titles of these presentations, 15 of them in all. All you have to do is call us and make a donation, a contribution, become a listener sponsor of this radio station. 1-800-439-5732. I'm looking for 30 of you tonight by the end of this newscast, and we are 22 minutes away from that hour. 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org. And now, back to the news. Confirmed cases of the virus in the U.S. hit another milestone, 7 million, according to the count kept by Johns Hopkins University, although the real number of infection is believed to be much higher. The spike across the Midwest, as well as parts of the West, has set off alarms at hospitals, schools, and colleges. Wisconsin averaging more than 2,000 new cases a day over the last week, compared with 675 3 weeks earlier. Hospitalizations in the state are at their highest level since the outbreak took hold in the United States in March. Utah seeing its average daily case count more than double from 3 weeks earlier. Oklahoma and Missouri regularly recording 1,000 new cases a day. And Missouri Governor Mike Parson, a staunch opponent of mask rules, tested positive himself this week. Kansas and Iowa also witnessing a spike in cases, in South Dakota and Idaho seeing sky-high rates of tests coming back positive. In the Midwest, the virus is now landing squarely in places where there is strong resistance to masks and governors who have been reluctant to require face coverings. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis lifted all restrictions on restaurants and other businesses in Florida today in a move to reopen the state's economy. Despite the spread of the coronavirus there, the Republican governor's move is sure to stoke debate in a politically crucial state. His order allows restaurants across Florida to immediately reopen at full capacity and prevents cities and counties from ordering them to close without justifying it for economic or health reasons. A fourth major clinical trial for a COVID vaccine debuted this week. Public health officials are asking for your help. Suzanne Potter reports.
Millions of volunteers are needed to aid in the effort, but so far just 410,000 people have signed up. COVID-19 Prevention Network Executive Director Dr. Jim Kublin says everyone is going to benefit from these vaccines, so we should all be willing to pitch in.
We desperately need the general public to volunteer for these vaccine clinical trials. This is a tremendous way for people to step up and really accomplish their civic duty by contributing to the advancement of these COVID vaccines.
It takes about 5 minutes to enter your information on the website preventcovid.org. No one in the trial will be infected with the virus itself. If you are chosen, you'll be given an injection of either a placebo or of the possible vaccine and be studied for several years. Side effects are usually limited to redness and swelling at the injection site. Kublin says they need adult volunteers from all walks of life and every ethnic group, but they especially encourage the elderly and people of color to sign up.
We're encouraging all communities, but particularly those disproportionately impacted, to join us in this national and global effort.
Hundreds of sites are activated every week, so it's not too late to get involved. Study participants are paid for their time, usually a few $100s. A growing anti-vaccine movement has questioned the safety or effectiveness of some immunizations in recent years. Patients are advised to consult their doctor with any concerns. For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
Landlords are going to courts around the country claiming that a national eviction moratorium unfairly strains their finances and infringes on their rights as property owners. At least 25 such lawsuits have been filed, including federal challenges of President Trump's directive halting evictions for many renters through the year's end. In Memphis, Tennessee, 7 landlords who manage or own more than 5,000 rental units filed a sweeping complaint this month. The Centers for Disease Control imposed the eviction ban in its capacity to protect public health, calling it an effective measure against the spread of the coronavirus among people who could be left homeless. Struggling to contain recent virus infections, European leaders decried a collective failure to vanquish the pandemic. They told the UN General Assembly today that it's time for countries to reinvent international cooperation in response. This year's unusual work-from-home General Assembly comes as COVID-19 cases keep rising in many regions, but especially in Europe. Some of the world's most advanced hospitals in some of the world's richest countries are again coming under strain. Italy's leader called for collective renewal. The Czech leader said it's time for Europe to rethink its role in the world. Scotland this week recorded 486 positive coronavirus cases in 24 hours, the highest number of daily cases in a single day for that country. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says almost half of the new cases were from the greater Glasgow and Clyde areas. Sturgeon recently announced a ban on visiting other homes. The UK is witnessing a steep rise in infections. This week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson ordered new restrictions, including early closing times for pubs and restaurants. More from reporter Simon Marks.
The reaction from British business to the new restrictions that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled. He said on Tuesday they may now be in place for the next 6 months, and that's assuming he doesn't have to tighten them further if the rate of COVID-19 infections continues to rise. The hospitality sector in the UK is being especially hard hit. Pubs and restaurants in England will have to close at 10 o'clock. Indoor team sports remain banned, and stricter rules are to be enforced on the wearing of face masks. Frank McKenna is with the lobby group Downtown in Business, and he says the economy is going to need fresh support from the government.
You know, I've literally this morning had people from bars, restaurants and one hotel, a major hotel as well, in tears, one of them, because they said these measures are likely to kill them. We're seeing businesses that, you know, under normal circumstances will be able to continue to employ people. And unfortunately, the measures that are being taken and this sort of in-out, shake-it-all-about hokey-cokey approach that has been adopted is just not fair.
Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, is reportedly weighing the possibility of subsidising the wages of employees impacted by the latest changes. They come just 3 weeks after the British government was encouraging people to return to their offices and workplaces.
Simon Marks,
Washington.
Ski enthusiasts visiting Austria's resorts will need to go without the so-called après-ski parties as the country deals with the fallout of the coronavirus outbreak. Austria's Chancellor Sebastian Kurz announced new anti-coronavirus measures ahead of the next skiing season next Thursday, including a 10 p.m. curfew in the three main tourist states. Visitors will not be able to take part in the popular parties, which involve dancing, drinking, and socializing after the skiing is done. Trent Murray has more from Berlin.
Austria's Chancellor said he had a clear message. Yes to enjoying skiing, but no to après-ski parties. Major resorts will be forced to close their bars by 10 p.m. and dancing in close quarters discouraged. Authorities will also ask skiers to wear face coverings while riding lifts and keeping a safe distance whilst lining up.
Reporter Trent Murray in Berlin. And you're listening to the Evening News, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings, we host Up Front.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m., right after Democracy Now!
On Up Front.
We are looking for 30 people to keep the boat afloat here at KPFA. 30 people to make a financial contribution towards our fundraising goal this fall fund drive here at KPFA. 30 people who say that the programming of the news, the kind of information that they get from this radio station, the kind of music and culture that this radio station presents is worth a financial contribution. 30 of you tonight at 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org. And if you are one of the 30 making that contribution or that donation, becoming a listener supporter, a listener sponsor, you will get a copy of the KPFA Political History Collection. It's called Don't Believe the Hype. 15 different presentations by authors, thinkers, philosophers, mostly lectures. 15 presentations, including Understanding Socialism, an analysis of Reverend Martin Luther King's radicalism, How Fascism Works, Tom Paine, Lessons for Our Time. 1-800-439-5732. That comes to you for any donation, and we need 30 of them. 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org. There's been a major development in the 4-year campaign to save the West Berkeley Shell Mound and Village site. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has announced it's placed the Shell Mound site on its 2020 list of America's 11 most endangered historic places. The Shell Mound is a significant site for Ohlone Indians who have been fighting plans to develop mixed-use housing there. KPFA's Christina Onnested has a story.
The West Berkeley Shell Mound is thought to be one of the first Ohlone Village sites in the San Francisco Bay Area and goes back some 5,700 years. Shellfish harvested from the bay were used to bury the dead, along with ritual objects and artifacts, creating mounds as tall as 30 feet. The site was mapped in 1907, and UC Berkeley archaeologists removed 95 Ohlone burials and more than 3,400 artifacts before the shell mound was leveled in the 1950s. Today, it's a paved-over parking lot. But Karina Gold of Ohlone descent hasn't forgotten what's underneath. The tribal leader and traditional spokesperson of the Confederated Villages of Lejeune, together with city officials and advocacy groups, petitioned the National Trust for Historic Preservation to recognize the West Berkeley Shell Mound as one of the nation's most endangered historic places in 2020 and won that designation.
Through this recognition, we are acknowledging the legacy of our ancestors and the continued importance of this sacred site for those in this present moment and for the next 7 generations. Everything you now see in the Bay Area was built in the last 250 years. And so not that long ago, my ancestors were living throughout the Bay. We have never left our territories. We have an unbroken tie to these lands and our sacred places since the beginning of time. Throughout the years, our tribe has continued to pray at this place, just as our ancestors did. This land is an important cultural landscape, and this recognition gives us a platform to tell our story, a story that has been erased and invisibilized.
Gold adds the designation validates the historic significance of the site to the Ohlone people. That could play in Gold's favor to preserve and restore the West Berkeley Shell Mound, which is at the center of a years-long development battle. Developers proposed a mixed-use retail and high-end apartment complex, but faced pushback from Ohlone activists like Gold. After years of resistance, plans changed, and developers proposed housing, including affordable housing instead. But through grassroots organizing, city leaders sided with the Ohlone and again rejected the plan. The developers challenged it. The courts ruled in the city's favor, and now the case is under appeal. Here's Gould again, along with Berkeley Mayor Jesse Arreguín.
We are not against development. Indeed, we need good housing for our own families who cannot afford to live in our own territory. But we must do everything we can to stop the desecrations of our sacred sites.
The city of Berkeley in 2000 landmarked the first Native American village site on all of the San Francisco Bay, the West Berkeley Shell Mound. And we remain committed to honoring 5,000 years of Ohlone history alive within that landscape.
The recognition as an endangered historic site carries weight. Since the National Trust for Historic Preservation began listing endangered places some 30 years ago, more than 300 sites have received that recognition. Hundreds have been preserved. Less than 5% of those designated places have been lost. Catherine Malone-Frantz is Chief Preservation Officer at the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
The West Berkeley Shell Mound is a cautionary tale of the pain that a people experience when they are confronted with the loss of their connection to their history, and in particular, their sacred sites. Halting the further destruction and desecration of the Shell Mound and acknowledging the site as a sacred resource of the Ohlone people demonstrates that preservation can and must be a force for reconciliation and justice.
The National Trust for Historic Preservation's other 11 most endangered historic places for 2020 include the National Negro Opera Company House in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Built in 1894, it housed the nation's first black opera company, established by a woman. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for KPFA.
Still haven't reached our goal of 30 contributors to the fund drive here at KPFA. During this KPFA newscast, we need some more listener sponsors to call us at 1-800-439-5732 or to go online and make your contribution, kpfa.org, 1-800-439-5732. We are looking for 30 of you by the end of this newscast, 6 minutes away, 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org. California's largest wildfire is threatening a marijuana-growing enclave, and authorities say many of the local residents have refused to evacuate. Their resistance to abandon their maturing crops comes as forecasters predict a new round of hot, dry, windy conditions that could fan flames this weekend. The wildfire, called the August Complex, is nearing the communities of Post Mountain and Trinity Pines, about 200 miles northwest of Sacramento. The Los Angeles Times reports that police went door to door, warning of the fire danger, but could not force residents to evacuate. The Times says as many as 1,000 people remain in the two communities. There's a high fire danger this weekend. The National Weather Service has issued a red flag fire warning for hilly regions of the San Francisco Bay Area. The warning begins 9 p.m. tomorrow, lasts until 8 a.m. Monday morning. The highest threat is for the hills of northeast Sonoma County, Napa County, the East Bay Hills, and Mount Diablo. The Weather Service warns that any fires that develop will spread rapidly in the hot, dry, and windy weather. Smoke from wildfires can cause inflammation, irritate the lungs, and affect the immune system, weakening the body's defense against infection from the coronavirus. Eric Galatis reports.
Wildfires are becoming more common and severe due to climate change and its warmer and drier conditions in Wyoming and across the West. Now, health experts are warning that people exposed to wildfire smoke are also at increased risk for COVID-19 infection. Cheryl Perosi is a pulmonary physician with University of Utah Health. She says the overlap of wildfire season with the coronavirus pandemic has sharply increased health risks.
Wildfire smoke itself has harmful health effects, and there's a growing body of research showing that air pollution exposure increases risk for COVID-19 infection and more severe disease or more deaths.
She says wildfire smoke includes a complex mixture of dangerous particulate pollution, which can cause inflammation and suppress the body's natural immune system, increasing the risk for respiratory viral infections, including COVID-19. The latest data on air quality in your area is online at airnow.gov. People who have contracted COVID-19 may also develop long-term conditions that put them at greater risk during wildfire season. Perosi says the best way to protect yourself against the smoke is to reduce exposure. She says, if possible, avoid outdoor activity during poor air quality days.
This applies to all people, but especially more vulnerable people who are at higher risk, like older adults and people with heart and lung diseases, should do everything they can to protect themselves from exposure to air pollution, but also exposure to COVID-19.
The CDC's recommendations include having prescription drugs and other necessities delivered. If you have to go outside, some masks rated N95 or better offer protection against particulate matter, but Perosi says the mask won't help unless it's a tight fit. Using an air purifier and high-efficiency particulate air filters in air conditioning and heating units can also improve indoor air quality. For Public News Service, I'm Eric Galatis.
We need a little more help, a few more of you to reach our goal of 30 contributors during this newscast to the fall fundraising drive here at KPFA to keep this newscast on the air and to keep this listener-sponsored station functioning through the rest of the year, including the vital elections coming up. Please, 1-800-439-5732. We will give you Don't Believe the Hype, KPFA's political history collection, for any amount of donation. You can also donate online at kpfa.org. France's interior minister says the main suspect in a double stabbing today outside the former Paris offices of a satirical newspaper, where dozens were killed in 2015, was arrested a month ago for carrying a screwdriver, but was not on police radar for Islamic radicalization. Two suspects were arrested separately shortly after the stabbing, in which two people were wounded. The main suspect was arrested not far from the attack site, near the building where the weekly Charlie Hebdo was located before the 2015 attack. France's counterterrorism prosecutor said that the authorities suspect a terrorist motive because of the place and the timing of the stabbings in front of the building where Charlie Hebdo was based until the Islamic extremist attack on its cartoonists, and at a time when the suspects in that 2015 attack are on trial across town. Reporter Peter Allen in Paris.
Two victims of this horrendous attack are currently in intensive care in Paris. They were staff members of a news agency called Premier Ligne. Two men have been arrested. The main suspect is an 18-year-old man, and he's said to have used a meat cleaver to carry out this very bloody attack.
And that's Peter Allen reporting from Paris. 1-800-439-5732. If we could squeeze you under the line here in the final 30 seconds, and you could become one of the 30 people to help us financially in this fund drive. 1-800-439-5732, online at kpfa.org. Mostly sunny with highs in the upper 70s around the Bay tomorrow. Mostly sunny inland with highs in the 90s. And in the central San Joaquin Valley, sunny with a high of 90. Los Angeles, partly cloudy, highs in the low 80s.
This is a community announcement for September 2020. Yoga and Qigong instructor Amelia Barilli continues to offer a free 1-hour workshop via Zoom every Saturday. These workshops are designed to de-stress as well as boost and balance the immune system. The Spanish language workshop is at 11 a.m. The English language workshop is at 3 p.m. The Zoom link is posted on her site at ameliabarilli.com. She also has health information on her YouTube channel, The New Paradigms. This community announcement is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your event for consideration to calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this announcement again, call 510-848-6767, extension 621, or view it online at kpfa.org.